Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and over the next half an hour, we're going to be answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. First up, what are 5 markets U.S. colleges should not ignore? Second, will U.S. elections affect future student interests? And what is one country you wouldn't expect to benefit from Western countries' restrictions on international students? We'll answer those 3 questions and more in just the next few minutes. But before we do, as we do each week on the Roundup, we take our questions that we answer here on Wednesdays from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays. That comes out in 2 forms, either in email, direct to your inbox at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, or via LinkedIn, if you prefer to get your international ed news there. That comes out about 8:30 in your notifications. And we call the newsletter All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And in case you're wondering, SMIE, company name SMIE Consulting, stands for Social Media and International Education Consulting. And we've been doing these roundups for the last, almost 6 years now. And we've really found this Wednesday time period, and we know most folks aren't watching us live here on Wednesday afternoon, but we do make it available on demand on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, as well as in an audio-only podcast form so that you can listen on demand when you have working time, workouts, or just getting through your email inbox every week in your offices. So the questions we ask are taken from the news stories that we talk about, give our hot takes on Monday in the newsletter, and we go in depth into some themes we see developing in those newsletter stories each week here in question format in the Roundup. So between the email version and the LinkedIn version, we now have well over 2,100 subscribers to the newsletter. Very excited that so many international educators are getting their news or at least part of their news each week from SMIE Consulting. So thanks again for being a part of the community and sharing out what I'm sharing with you, with your communities as well and networks. Because I know how busy we get in our daily lives in international education, and how it's hard to get our heads up from the work that we're doing each week to focus on the bigger picture questions that are affecting what we do in our industry. So we take the time through the newsletter, through the Roundup, to provide this content free of charge to help inform, hopefully, some of what you do in your daily work. So let's get to the first question. What are 5 markets U.S. colleges should not ignore? This is coming from our friends at INTED, who you know if you've been reading the Roundup, listening to the Roundup, or getting the newsletter over the last few years. You know they're one of our favorite content creators when it comes to international ed content, and certainly international student recruitment is their bailiwick, and they are exceptional at that. Excellent consulting service, database driven, market solutions driven, that provide a lot of great content every week to our audiences, international education audiences in the US and around the world. But they've put together over the course of the last couple of years a series of articles on different markets that they think should be on everybody's radar. And the 5 that are addressed here in this particular INTED blog are the markets that U.S. colleges should not be ignoring, or at least should be considering if they aren't already highly significant in their recruitment plans. 3 of the 5 are not really any big surprises. They're 3 of the top 5 recruitment markets anyway for U.S. colleges, and that's China, India, and Vietnam. And they do go into some detail in their blog on why each of those are significant, and then link out to articles that they've written previously on these topics, on these markets. And China and India are kind of the no-brainers, obviously, because they're the 2 largest countries in the world. Each are going in slightly different directions in terms of overall numbers coming to the United States, but you can't ignore them. They're the 2 biggest, and likely are in most of our institutions, top 5 countries of international students already, and will need to be a main mainstay of any future recruitment efforts just because of their size. Now, is a one-size-fits-all approach appropriate for international student recruitment? No. And in both of these are very different markets and very different motivations, very different questions that they need answered in our marketing materials, in the content we provide, in terms of the access to information we give them, support that they need throughout the process, and questions that might be relevant for us to answer in our communications with future students from these markets. But with regards to China, they make the claim that declining enrollment of Chinese students is a fact. It peaked around 2015, 2016, and it's been in decline since then. Why that decline has happened. It could never keep on going because Chinese population numbers were leveling out and have started to decline, and that impacts obviously college-age students that would be interested in going abroad. You see the impacts of economy in China, the post-COVID slow to respond to global study again, which COVID, as it has for U.S. Students deciding to stay maybe closer to home, international students also face these similar desires. If they are going to study abroad, they're looking to stay closer to home, and then Chinese students are certainly no exception. We've seen them flooding into other Southeast Asian markets, including Hong Kong, Singapore, other major education destination hubs in the region. The volume is shifting. We've all seen drop-offs in the number of undergraduate Chinese students coming to the U.S. to our campuses, but we have perhaps seen a rebound in graduate students. I know at UNLV, where I work, we have seen that Chinese students were in they were our number one source of students this fall, and primarily at the graduate level, where they had been dominant at the undergraduate level for so long, no longer so. We're seeing South Korea kind of taking over that place for our international undergraduates in terms of new students, but Chinese students, we're seeing a rebounding in graduate student interest from China. So it's obviously a different message and strategy you might use to attract those students. Why is the graduate market in China picking up? We've seen numerous reports with the economic slowdown in China. We've experienced globally with the recession. You have seen those that might have been looking to finish their undergraduate and go right into the job market taking a second look, because the job market in China is fairly weak right now in terms of prospects for the average college graduate from China, let alone for coming back from abroad. So some of those students that might have previously gone straight into the job market after finishing undergraduate degrees in China are now looking to maybe pursue graduate enrollment abroad, graduate degrees. So that market is starting to pick back up, and we've certainly seen the results of that at UNLV. They were, like I said, our largest single group in our new enrollments this fall. With regards to India, we've seen that has been traditionally a large graduate student market, and still is. It's well over 2/3, up to 70%, and maybe a little bit more, of Indian students in the United States are graduate education, graduate degree students, either master's or doctoral, hugely predominantly at the master's level. But you see what's happening with India is there has been increases in undergraduates' interest in from India, and that is perhaps it's not going to be nearly as large as perhaps China was in the mid-teens when they peaked in 2015-16. But you certainly see the growing middle class in India, the growing desire for of international schools within India that is populating a larger number of students that are having international education experiences who are then looking abroad. You see shifting dynamics in terms of where Indian students have been going, whereas previously there were Canada had been their number one destination, maybe still is in terms of overall numbers, but in terms of their percentages have been declining to Canada because of some political spats, because of restrictions that Canada has now put in place on Indian students. You now see a significant drop-off. Many Indian students going to Canada. We're looking at vocational programs, at public and private partnerships for vocational education. Now that's shifting to perhaps more master's degree programs, but it's a harder shift now with the restrictions put in place, with the political tensions that exist between Canada and India, and obviously with restrictions in other markets too. In Australia, their caps that they're putting in place starting in 2025, that's impacting where students are looking. And India being the largest international student-bound market now, you see very much shifting allegiances, and the U.S. is benefiting. You've seen the U.S. Dominate in terms of news in recent months with positive news regarding the Indian market, how the opening of a new consulate in Hyderabad with many more windows, 65, 75 windows for visa interviews last year. This year, you've seen, though the visa approval numbers have been down, you've seen still huge numbers applying for visas. And you now see, just in the last couple of weeks, 250,000 new visa appointment slots opened up between now and the January intake for most U.S. colleges. So there's more positive signs that we are in a better position to meet demand for the Indian student market, because it's only going up in the coming years in terms of interest in the United States. Excuse me. And one of the things that I mentioned about the growing undergraduate market in India, maybe you don't know this, but after China, which is still #1 for international undergraduates, India is in second place, sending the most international undergraduates to the United States each year. Though it's still well behind China, those numbers have been growing steadily. So you can't ignore that as an undergraduate market either. The next market on the list, Vietnam. We've talked about that in recent weeks. I was just there last week for a full week with our agent partners, GSM, visiting some of their key agencies to talk about in Ho Chi Minh City, in Da Nang, in Hanoi, talking to them about our programs, our price point, our scholarships, our strongest programs, our student service aspects, and focusing primarily at the undergraduate level. And you're going to continue to see undergraduates pouring into the United States from Vietnam, and maybe a little bit of graduate interest here and there. So understanding that market's pretty significant too. Again, a top 5 sending country to the United States, and at UNLV also #5 coming in to our university as well. So the last two are the ones that will jump off the page, and you'll go, when you hear these names: Tanzania and Guyana. Tanzania, obviously in East Africa, certainly growing markets. You see, there's less competition for the students that are going abroad from Tanzania. In Guyana, you've seen a huge economic boom with a lot of with the oil discoveries in the region. They are now on track to be a top 20 oil producer by 2027, reclassified in 2022 by the World Bank as a high income country, again, according to the data provided in the INTED article. So some real potential hidden gems that you could be exploring in terms of new recruitment markets to potentially explore with your institution. So that's the first question of the day. Again, what are some of the key markets that U.S. colleges should not be ignoring? 3 obvious ones, and then 2 ones that will certainly jump off the page at you. Now, the next question is one that is becoming increasingly on international educators' minds over the last few weeks as we approach our election in the United States in less than 3 weeks. Is it? My goodness, coming up quick. And that is, will U.S. election results affect future student interest? And there have been a series of surveys done in the last couple of years on elections from 2020 to now, and the differences between where international students were sharing their decisions even back in 2016 to now. Trump versus Clinton in 2016, Trump versus Harris now, previously Biden, and whether that was going to impact their decision making. IDP is the latest to have done a survey in this respect to analyze student interest across the globe, and their recent study suggested that 54% of prospective international students say the upcoming presidential election will not impact their decision to study in the U.S. Just over a third of students said the election would influence their decision, with most favoring a Kamala Harris victory. Kamala Harris victory. Regardless, and this is from Simon Emmett, the IDP Connect CEO, says, regardless of the election outcome, many international students have lifelong goals of studying in the United States, demonstrating the strong brand of U.S. institutions globally. And from my perspective, that really is the kicker for why the U.S. will continue to be the #1 destination, continue regardless of who's in the White House, the most desired destination for study for international students in terms of overall numbers. And this is these results are a little bit of a shift that going back to IDP's post-election survey in 2021 suggested that 67% of international students were more likely to study in the U.S. following Joe Biden's victory. That has been borne out, obviously, post-pandemic. You've seen the numbers come back up, so that's almost a natural evolution that was going to happen anyway. But whether or not it's attributable to who's in the White House, I doubt it, to be honest with you. Certainly, there have been politicians in the past that have said certain things. Obviously, in 2017, when Donald Trump took office, he introduced the Muslim travel bans that obviously impacted student interest beyond just those 7 countries, and not all 7 were Muslim countries. But you saw North Korea, Venezuela on that list, and clearly they're not Muslim majority countries. But those were countries that bans were put in place, and even though those bans were put in place and called travel bans, there were in each of those countries there were exceptions carved out for international students to still come and study, so that was never cut off completely. But the political damage of banning applicants from certain countries from coming to the United States does have legs and certainly had some impact. But the overall, you see, the one I was asked this question actually about surrounding this topic of election results and impacting student interest. I was asked this question by someone who's been in the business a number of years, mostly on the study abroad side, but he had asked, well, why should international students still come? And why do they still come? And we had the conversation about this, is that it's because, as Simon Emmett said, the U.S. has become a destination for most students for many years, and that it would have to be something extremely dramatic to sway their choices. And surveys can be very fickle, and depending on who you ask, where they are in the world. We don't have, this survey only had 916 respondents recently, so I don't have a breakdown of where they were in the world, but certainly you see IDP surveys, although they don't really have a lot of respondents from China typically, because they're not active in the Chinese market as much as some others are. So but we do see the policy changes in other countries that are very concrete and restricting international students coming to those destinations, UK, Canada, Australia. That does influence them more in our favor than perhaps whoever's going to be in the White House. Because I think that our system here in the United States, in terms of the system that governs immigration and regulations that impact international students while they're in the country, doesn't change dramatically. There have been tweaks that State Department has made to allow students to apply for their visa appointment, for visas up to a year in advance. That they've removed the requirement for in-person interviews for all applicants to only those that have never been to the haven't had a U.S. visa in the last 5 years, although the only ones that need to go physically for an interview. So that's freed up capacity, that's freed up opportunities, and those are tweaks that have had significant impact in the positive direction, but there's not really anything that's going to change dramatically in terms of the overall system, the overall process, unless without regulatory change that requires congressional approval and laws being passed and those regulations being approved, all of that. There's limited wiggle room that State Department and DHS, the two main players in affecting incoming international students and current students in the United States. So our system is set up so that even though those travel bans were put in place by Trump in 2017, they were all overturned by the courts in making it that those were overreach by the executive branch, by the president, to make those unilateral bans without real consideration or approvals to do so from other sources. So there's a lot of things that politicians say they're going to do that don't end up getting done because they can't do them because of the political realities on the ground in Congress. That legislation can't move forward unless it's bipartisan, because of the narrow margins between who's in charge in the Senate versus the House, let alone the White House. So those are the impacts that our system can survive political discourse that maybe isn't positive toward international or towards immigration. So I think that's the great saving grace, for example, of the U.S. system for international students coming here is it's a fairly stable process. There aren't dramatic changes that are going to make it extremely hard or prevent them from jumping through the hoops that we do require still. Some that don't make a whole lot of sense, but we still require. So it's interesting to see survey results certainly showing there's not going to be huge swings. There was perhaps that fear in 2016, and who knew we were going to be having a pandemic by the end of President Trump's first term. So that certainly had an impact late on, but certainly those first 3 years you were continuing to see those increases, regardless of who was in the White House, 2017, 18, 19. So what we're in a situation with now is, I think, all things considered, you couldn't ask for much more. And certainly most international educators are going to be hoping Vice President Harris is elected, because she's the product of two international students from Jamaica and India, respectively, her dad and mom. That reflects well for our industry, to show that, hey, international students can come here, even though they both eventually settled and worked here. That's on non-immigrant visas, which certainly State Department folks don't like to hear. But that is something that is a success and a viable legal pathway for international students to stay and work and eventually become citizens. And that's a permanent residence, at least. And that allowed Vice President Harris to become a viable candidate for the United States presidency. And that is a story of hope that certainly resonates well. We've gone through 4 years of Trump, and that was colored by a lot of political rhetoric. It was colored by COVID. It was covered by a lot of things. So a return to that for most international educators most all international educators isn't something we would invite, but certainly there'd be more stability, perhaps, in terms of the rhetoric that was come out that would be more supportive of international education, and certainly one that we would, I think, can see many more positives coming than wondering what the next tweet or message coming out of the White House is, or executive orders that threaten to upset our apple carts on our campuses. So that's where we're at with the second question on the U.S. election impact on international students. Again, not expecting huge swings one way or the other, but certainly a bit an easier transition and an upward trajectory anyway, I think, would be expected just based on the numbers and government restrictions happening in other countries. So let's move on to the third and final question of the day, and that is, what is one country you wouldn't expect to benefit from Western countries' restrictions on international students? Now, we've already talked. Canada, Australia, UK have imposed restrictions of various sorts over the last 12 months, 12 to 18 months. And moving forward, all three are seeing declines in visa applications, and visa approvals, and eventually enrollments in their countries. So we're going to be seeing a large uptick, I'm sure, in November. Continued upgrade, maybe not double digits, but certainly a good healthy percentage increase this fall. We'll see what that bears out next month with open doors in the fall snapshot survey that they released then. We'll see this by the numbers results to see where the jumps have occurred and what countries have really shot up through real-time data we'll have on who's actually in the country now. But one country you wouldn't expect to benefit, we all say we're expecting to benefit here in the United States, so that's no surprise. Who is that one country that you might not expect to be benefiting? It's China. Yeah, there's a couple stories out, and we'll share those in the chat. One from University World News: China sets out roadmap to become leading education power. This is not a new thing. China had invested heavily in the late noughties and the teens to really expand their soft power influence around the world through their Belt and Road Initiative, which is still ongoing. There are various elements of this BRI project that have involved educational programs, scholarships for international students to draw them, particularly from South Asia and Africa, to China to study. That led to pre-pandemic numbers that were rivaling UK and Australia, 400, 500,000 international students at the time. And then they dropped off a cliff as a result of the pandemic for the better part of 3 years, from 2020 to 2023. Inbound international students to China were severely restricted. And in fact, only in January 23 were they even allowed to start coming back on a regular basis. So you have had a significant drop off. So China's trajectory is only back up because they really hit a nadir, and we haven't really seen official numbers coming out of there for the last couple of years, 3 years in fact, and we're probably looking at half the number of international students that they had previously, probably in the 200 to 300,000 range, which is still significant, and they're looking to grow that steadily. But President Xi has said and instructed his Minister of Education that by 2035, China's vision is our grand goal and direction for the next 11 years is to become that leading educational power. And there are a lot of difficulties and challenges around the world in terms of their issues we've seen in the United States related to research, related to spying and cybersecurity, and all these threats to intellectual property being stolen by Chinese spies, and this military-civil fusion strategy that institutions have that are on restricted lists in the United States to have international exchanges with U.S. institutions. You've seen the state of Florida completely ban partnerships with Chinese institutions. But we all know, and those who follow the Roundup certainly know, and SMIE Consulting know, that we have seen a huge growth of international destinations for students who want to study outside their home countries. And China benefited in the late teens significantly. You've seen other countries benefit as well, but China does seem to be getting their act back together and prioritizing these partnerships. We'll see who is able to take advantage of those in other countries that aren't already restricted by government law or institutional law or institutional practice that restricts who they can do the partnerships with. Certainly the STEM areas in China are where their priorities have really been focused in terms of partnerships. You may be seeing that expand as well. Other countries might be beneficiaries of that expansion, since the U.S. is largely not going to be able to be a major player because of the threats of espionage and losing and research ties and all of the things that worry national security teams in the United States. We see that article certainly sees bringing in more students and sending out more students is a priority for China to grow their educational footprint. So we'll see what the realities are in the coming years, but certainly growth there is expected to rebound to at least where they were pre-pandemic, with up to 400,000 international students. Now, where are those students coming from? We've seen huge growth from 1,800 in 2007 to 10,000 in 2023, so students coming from Malaysia. You've seen other markets also attract students from Singapore, from India, less so from India recently because of the political tensions that exist between China and India. Many Indian students were going for medical degrees. Now there's a lot during the pandemic. There were some significant challenges there, so we'll see if that rebounds at all. They have seen, they've always been super focused on rankings for their institutions. Some of their top institutions, Peking University is up to 14th, Tsinghua University up to 20th in the world according to QS 2025 rankings. You see, in addition to Malaysian students, you've seen Singaporeans start to really jump back on the China bandwagon. not necessarily Singaporean, but you see a lot of other countries starting to benefit from increases in um, students that are looking at China as a potential destination. So we'll see if that bears fruit, but certainly there's a long road to go for China to get back to where it was. But certainly, if they pour the amount of money that they did in their earlier BRI efforts into scholarships and other schemes to attract students, they might be focusing more on partnerships, which in certain areas might be a little bit more attractive for U.S. institutions outside the STEM fields, but we'll see. But that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. Thanks again for joining in the conversation. And for those of you who are our regular listeners or watchers of the Roundup, we are closing in on our 300th episode. In the next month or so, we'll be hitting episode number 300. I'm really excited about bringing that to you. So until then, until next week on the 23rd, we'll be back with you live for our next roundup with 3 new questions to answer. But thanks again for being a part of the conversation. Have a great day.